The Untold History of Homosexuality in Greek Gymnasiums. Picture it: sunlight on marble floors, the sound of sandals' bodies moving through dust and sweat. The Greek gymnasium wasn't just about training. It was about power, beauty, and sometimes forbidden desire. Here, older men mentored younger ones, taught them to wrestle, to debate, to live with discipline. But beneath the lessons, there were glances, poems, and whispers. Love between men wasn't illegal, but it had rules: who could court, who could refuse, and when a teacher's affection crossed the line. Step wrong, and it wasn't just shame, it could ruin reputations or start a feud. Yet these same gymnasiums produced the poets and thinkers who wrote openly about love between men as something noble, even divine. So was it mentorship or something deeper everyone pretended not to see? Tell me the exact time you're watching sunrise scroll or midnight dive. If this story caught your curiosity, tap like so. The next one runs a little farther. They say ancient Greece invented democracy, drama, and philosophy. But if you'd stepped into one of their gymnasiums, you might have wondered whether they also invented the world's first luxury spa. Minus the towels. The air smells of olive oil and dust. Sunlight slices through tall colonnades and hits marble floors polished by countless bare feet. Around you, young men stretch wrestle oil each other's backs and argue about poetry as casually as modern folks scroll through their phones. The word gymnasium comes from gymnos, meaning naked, and the Greeks took that literally. You walk in expecting a fitness club. You find instead a strange fusion of temple school and catwalk. Here, every inch of the body is both a statement and a question. What is beauty? What is virtue? What does it mean to be human when every muscle is sculpted in the service of philosophy? There's a rhythm to the place, like an orchestra of grunts, laughter, and scraping sandals. The sound of a discus slicing the air is followed by the slap of skin meeting sand. You can't help but notice how much this world worships balance between strength and grace, discipline and pleasure, body and mind. Imagine a culture that treats a well-proportioned calf with the same reverence we give to a mathematical proof. To the Greeks, there was no contradiction in training your abs and your ethics in the same courtyard. Both, after all, built harmony. Philosophers drift between the athletes, their robes fluttering like lazy sails. One might be Socrates. He spent plenty of time in gymnasiums, not to work out, but to talk, question, and occasionally charm his students. In fact, gymnasiums were the beating heart of civic life. They were where citizens prepared for war, debated politics, and yes, exchanged the occasional flirtatious glance. You reach a low stone bench where a trainer called a pedotribes is shouting advice about posture. His hands are rough from years of handling javelins and bodies alike. Discipline first, he barks, then grace. You watch a boy adjust his stance, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if the future of Athens depended on it. Maybe it does. The city's ideals are written on its bodies: symmetry, self-control, glory through excellence, arete. It's strange, though. For all the pride in virtue, there's an undeniable charge in the air. You feel it in the long looks exchanged between trainer and pupil, in the way praise lingers just a little too long. No one calls it love. No one needs to. The Greeks saw desire as an educational force, a spark that could drive a student toward greatness or toward ruin. You lean against a cool marble pillar and think about how different this feels from modern gyms. No earbuds, no mirrors, no leg day. Here it's all about becoming a better version of yourself, not for Instagram, but for the city, for the gods, for glory. Every drop of sweat is civic duty. The oil gleams on the skin of the wrestlers like molten bronze, catching the sunlight in flashes that would make any sculptor jealous. And in fact, the sculptors are here too, sketching outlines for the next statue that will immortalize these perfect proportions. You can almost hear them muttering about how the gods themselves must envy Athens. The idea of the gymnasium is intoxicating, a place where exercise is a moral act and beauty itself a public service. You see a young man helping another adjust a bandage. It's an ordinary gesture, but there's tenderness in it, an acknowledgement that physical perfection is fleeting, but companionship endures. You wonder, did they know what kind of legacy they were building? That someday, millennia later, tourists would stare at their marble athletes and whisper about what those poses really meant? That archaeologists would debate whether these places were classrooms, sanctuaries, or something far more complicated. Somewhere a flute begins to play a slow, haunting tune that echoes through the courtyard. It softens the sounds of the training ground, wrapping everything in a dreamlike haze. You blink, and for a moment it feels like time is stretching, as if this ritual of body and mind will never end. You sit quietly absorbing the sight, sweat, sunlight, marble, and philosophy all tangled together. This isn't just a place to get stronger. It's a living conversation between flesh and ideal passion and restraint. And whether anyone will admit it or not, that tension is what keeps the gymnasium alive. You wake the next morning to the same chorus of sandals scraping marble and the scent of olive oil warmed by sun. It hits you then, this isn't a gym the way you imagined. It's a classroom, and every muscle here is part of the curriculum. The Greeks didn't just train bodies, they trained citizens. A boy your age runs past laughing as his tutor shouts after him to finish reciting a passage from Homer. Between the wrestling matches and the discus throws, students are expected to memorize poetry, debate ethics, and practice oratory. Imagine if your local fitness club suddenly required you to defend Plato before using the treadmill. Here, sweat and speech are inseparable. The gymnasium sits at the crossroads of education and worship. Statues of Hermes and Heracles, patrons of athletics, guard the entrance, their stone gazes calm and judgmental. You pass beneath them to the palaestra, the wrestling court. In one corner, a philosopher adjusts his robe and lectures about virtue, while boys spar a few feet away. Each throw, each word is meant to polish the soul as well as the skin. A young instructor waves you over. You can't understand courage, he says, until you feel what it's like to fall. Then he trips you neatly onto the sand. It's not cruel. It's a lesson. You taste dust, hear laughter, and realize this is how Athenian boys learn through rhythm repetition and the occasional bruise. Across the yard, another group gathers around a man scratching diagrams into the sand with a stick. Geometry today. But listen closely, the examples sound suspiciously poetic. The circle, he says, is perfection. The straight line, virtue. The curve, desire. You can't tell whether he's teaching math or morality. There's a certain comfort in how everything here overlaps. The paidagogos, a personal slave assigned to each boy, hovers nearby carrying scrolls and sandals, making sure his charge doesn't skip lessons or misbehave. To us it might sound like helicopter parenting. But in Athens, this constant guidance was considered essential, a moral compass made human. And then there's the language. Every conversation hums with words like sophrosine, self-control, or kalokagathia, the harmony of body and spirit. It's more than vocabulary. It's a worldview. You can almost feel it pressing down on you, the expectation that you should not only be fit, but good. That every act of strength should echo something divine. When you sit on the cool steps for a break, a friend beside you points to a group of older men under the colonnade, teachers, veterans, perhaps philosophers. They watch the young athletes with a mix of pride and longing, the way artists might study a perfect sculpture. They see themselves. Your friend whispers as they once were or wish they had been. You realize the gymnasium is a theater of memory. Each generation tries to remake itself in the image of its youth, polishing away weakness and excess, sculpting ideals that never quite exist. The Greeks even have a word for this lifelong striving agon, the struggle. It applies to everything: sports, politics, philosophy, even love. Especially love. Someone cracks a joke about how Socrates never competed in anything and half the courtyard laughs. But then someone else reminds them he fought bravely at Potidaea and he was known for enduring hunger and cold without complaint. Virtue, it seems, can flex its muscles in silence too. A teacher claps his hands. Time for another round. You join a line of students stretching in the shade of an olive tree. The bark smells sharp, the air heavy with dust and sun. A cicada shrieks somewhere overhead. You focus on the rhythm of movement, the same gestures practiced by generations before you, the same pursuit of balance. The class ends with a reading from Solon, the lawgiver, who once decreed that every citizen must stay fit to defend the polis. You can see why the gymnasium is more than a playground. It's a forge for warriors and thinkers alike. You feel it in the ache of your limbs and the burn of the sun across your back, the sense that knowledge and strength here are two sides of the same coin. Later, as the day cools, boys gather around the philosophers, again listening, questioning, sometimes arguing too loudly until a trainer hushes them. The city hums beyond the walls, but inside the rhythm of learning never stops. Every bruise is a lesson, every word a weight lifted. The next day you arrive early, before the chatter, before the laughter, before the oil lamps are snuffed out by dawn. The gymnasium is quiet, and for a moment you can almost hear the heartbeat of the city itself. Then slowly, the place fills with the sound of sandals on stone and the low murmur of greetings. But there's something else in the air this morning. Something softer, an awareness that moves between glances like an invisible thread. You notice how the eyes of one athlete linger on another, a heartbeat too long. How the trainer's voice drops when giving a compliment. How the boy beside you flushes when his friend touches his shoulder to demonstrate a throw. It isn't shameful. It isn't even secret. It's simply there, woven into the rhythm of training, as natural as breath. In Athens, desire between men was not condemned. It was dissected, debated, even celebrated, so long as it followed certain unspoken codes. The philosophers called it philia, when it was noble affection, eros, when it burned brighter. To them, beauty was a spark of divine truth, and admiring it wasn't sin, it was study. You weren't supposed to lust after the body. You were supposed to love the soul that lived inside it, but tell that to a courtyard full of sun-oiled athletes. You stretch beside a boy from another district, his hair braided back neatly, his grin lazy. He jokes about your clumsy wrestling stance, then offers to help correct it. His hands find your shoulders, guiding, adjusting, lingering. You tell yourself it's just technique. He doesn't say otherwise. The philosophers, of course, had opinions. Plato once described love between men as the highest form of affection, two souls recognizing each other as fragments of the same whole. In his Symposium, he even argued that when lovers gaze upon each other's beauty, they're really seeking divine perfection. It sounds lofty until you watch two wrestlers grappling in the sand, their bodies lock the crowd, pretending not to stare too hard. It's strange how the Greeks managed to turn even desire into philosophy. You hear a tutor explaining that physical attraction properly guided can inspire greatness. Eros, he says, is a ladder. Start with the beauty of a body and climb toward the beauty of wisdom. Easy for him to say. He's not the one distracted by the curve of someone's arm in the sunlight. Still, there's a tenderness here that's hard to describe. You see it in the way older students encourage the younger ones, or how a trainer's scolding can soften into laughter. It's not all passion and poems, it's mentorship, pride, friendship. The Greeks called it paiderastia, a relationship that in its ideal form was supposed to teach the younger partner virtue, courage, and honor. Reality, of course, was messier. Some men abused the system. Others turned it into genuine companionship that lasted decades. Modern ears bristle at the concept, and rightly so. But to the Greeks, it fit within their world of hierarchies and roles, citizen and apprentice teacher, and pupil lover and beloved. It was about status as much as sentiment. Yet even in those constraints, real emotion bloomed. History inconveniently is full of contradictions like that. You overhear a group debating whether love weakens warriors. One insists that affection makes soldiers hesitate. Another counters that it makes them fight harder to protect the one beside them. You remember reading how the sacred band of Thebes, an elite military unit, was said to be made entirely of pairs of lovers sworn to defend one another to the death. The Greeks didn't just talk about love, they weaponized it. A breeze moves through the courtyard carrying the smell of sweat figs and oiled leather. The sun climbs higher, and the marble glows gold. Around you the world hums with life bodies in motion, minds in conversation, hearts quietly entangled. You realize this is what makes the Greek gymnasium so unique. It's not just a place to train strength or intellect. It's a place where affection itself becomes part of the lesson, where admiration is as common as chalk dust. You catch that same boy from earlier laughing with his friends. He waves you over, and for a moment it feels like something simple and timeless, companionship, curiosity, a spark of connection that transcends the centuries. You don't name it. You just feel it the way the ancients must have, as something both dangerous and divine. It starts with a look, just one, and suddenly you understand why philosophers could write whole treatises about love and never run out of ink. The gymnasium is full again, but the mood has changed. The laughter's still there, and the dust still golden, but the air feels charged like the moment before a thunderstorm. Along the colonnade, older men stand, watching their robes brushing the marble eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. They are mentors, patrons, admirers, each one balancing on that fine line between educator and hunter. This is where the ideal and the real begin to collide. You feel it when a respected teacher lingers too close to a favorite pupil. His praise too personal, his hand on the shoulder too long. You see it in the way young men learn to read intentions before they read philosophy. There are rules, yes spoken and unspoken. A youth should be pursued, not possessed. The mentor must offer guidance, not gratification. Desire must be cloaked in dignity. But the human heart has never cared much for rules. You remember what Socrates said, at least what Plato wrote him saying, that the best kind of love is the one that leads the soul toward virtue, not pleasure. Yet even Socrates, for all his wisdom, had his admirers. Alcibiades, the golden boy of Athens, once confessed publicly that he'd tried to seduce Socrates and failed. The crowd laughed. Socrates didn't. He simply smiled, that slow, maddening smile that made everyone wonder if he knew something the rest of them didn't. You imagine being one of those boys, trying to tell the difference between affection and ambition. When a famous man praises your beauty, is it mentorship or something else? When he offers to guide your education, is it for your mind or for his pride? The Greeks had entire comedies mocking these situations. Aristophanes wrote them with a wink, but the laughter always carried an edge. Near the wrestling pit, you overhear a conversation between two older men. It's not wrong to admire beauty, one says, as long as you teach him to be good. The other laughs. And if he teaches you something instead? They both know the answer, but neither says it aloud. The truth is, the gymnasium was both sanctuary and stage. For every genuine mentor who cared about virtue, there was another chasing vanity or power. And for every student seeking wisdom, there was one who learned how to play the game, how to flatter, how to evade, how to use admiration as currency. You can't help but think it sounds familiar. Different millennium, same politics. Even the city tried to regulate affection. Laws forbade citizens from prostituting themselves not because of morality, but because it degraded the dignity of a free man. Love, like everything in Athens, had to serve the polis. That's the paradox. You were encouraged to love beauty, but only if it made you more honorable. You could worship the body, but not fall enslaved to it. You paused to watch two wrestlers circle each other in the sand. Their movements are slow, deliberate, each testing the other's limits. The trainer's eyes narrow, assessing not just skill, but control. A man who cannot master his body, he says, cannot master his soul. The crowd murmurs agreement, though you can tell half of them are thinking about something entirely different. There's a certain tension in the air, one that feels ancient and modern at once. The desire to connect, to be seen, to be chosen. It's as old as the stones beneath your feet. Maybe that's what made these gymnasiums so electric. They were places where admiration and ambition danced so close together that no one could tell where one ended and the other began. You wander toward the shade, trying to make sense of it all. A young boy walks by, scrolls tucked under his arm, and an older man falls into step beside him, speaking softly. The scene is tender, almost parental, yet it hums with something unspoken. It's easy to romanticize the past, but standing here, you can see how blurred the lines really were. Still, for all its contradictions, this world believed deeply in transformation of body, mind, and even love itself. Maybe that's why they called it education, not corruption. Maybe that's why, despite everything, these relationships helped shape the greatest thinkers of the age. The flute starts again somewhere in the courtyard, the same haunting tune as before. You close your eyes, and for a heartbeat, the noise fades, the shouts, the laughter, the whispers. All that remains is that question echoing through centuries: can love make you better, or only more human? By now you've learned to read the room, the tilt of a head, the raised brow, the small smiles traded between philosopher and pupil. But as the days pass, you also start to notice that Athens itself is divided over what all of this really means. The gymnasium might look like a shrine to harmony, but under its marble surface lies a battlefield of ideas. You hear it first as gossip drifting between the pillars, one statesman condemning the behavior of another for unmanly affection, a rival poet mocking a rival's softness. Everyone admires beauty. No one agrees on what to do about it. The city that built temples to Eros and Aphrodite is also the same city that prosecutes indecency. A paradox in sandals. Near the edge of the courtyard, a group of older men debate quietly. You drift closer, pretending to adjust a sandal strap. One quotes Solon the lawgiver, "Love young men, if it makes you virtuous." Another counters with a smirk, and who decides what virtuous means. Their laughter ripples across the colonnade. That's when you start realizing that in Athens, the rules of desire weren't written down, they were performed. A young man could accept admiration, even affection, so long as he remained modest. Too much eagerness, and he was mocked. Too much disdain, and he was accused of arrogance. It was like walking a tightrope in sandals. The laws themselves were strange mirrors of morality. A citizen caught selling affection could lose his right to vote, to hold office, even to speak in court. The message was clear: love freely, but never for profit. Desire was meant to elevate, not cheapen. You can't help thinking how even 2,000 years later, people are still arguing over who gets to define respectable love. One philosopher nearby quotes a passage from Aeschines' speech against Timarchus, a courtroom drama that was less about crime and more about reputation. The accused had supposedly accepted gifts and attention from older men in his youth, and for that years later, he was declared unworthy of citizenship. Athens was a democracy, but image was everything. The gymnasium wasn't just a training ground. It was a stage where reputations were built, admired, or quietly destroyed. Someone asks whether women ever came here. The answer is an easy no. Respectable women were barred entirely. The gymnasium was a world of men, citizens, students, slaves, philosophers, and that exclusivity made its energy even more charged. It wasn't just about attraction. It was about hierarchy, control, and civic identity. To be seen here was to belong. To be excluded was to vanish. You think about the irony, the same culture that celebrated beauty in marble banned half its population from even witnessing it. Maybe perfection always comes with blind spots. Later that afternoon, you pass a group of youths whispering near the entrance. They're giggling about an incident. Apparently, a famous orator was caught visiting a boy's house too often, and now the city's rumor mills are spinning faster than a potter's wheel. Reputation here is as fragile as clay. One wrong glance can turn a philosopher into a punchline. Still, for all the laws and gossip, love persists. It hides in gestures and poetry, in coded words passed between friends. You hear one of the students reciting a line from Theognis' Happy is he who loves a boy of sense whose mind and beauty are one. The others chuckle, but there's a tenderness there, a recognition that affection, whatever its rules, still beats stubbornly against the walls of convention. And that's the genius and the tragedy of Greek society. It could rationalize passion into philosophy, legislate tenderness into hierarchy, and yet somehow still produce poetry that breaks your heart. It's a culture obsessed with order, but powered by contradiction. You look around the courtyard again, the same marble, the same voices echoing under the columns, and you start to see the cracks, not in the stone, but in the certainty. The gymnasium teaches strength, yes, but also the art of pretending. To be good, but not too pure. To desire, but never lose control. A flute drifts through the air again, softer this time, almost melancholic. The sun is lowering, and the statues of Hermes and Heracles cast long shadows across the sand. For a moment, the whole place feels like a living metaphor, beautiful, disciplined, and quietly at war with itself. The sun is hotter today, pressing down on the courtyard until even the marble seems to shimmer. You wander toward the sculptor's workshop beside the gymnasium, following the sound of a chisel biting into stone. Inside, it smells of dust and beeswax, of sweat and patience. A young apprentice stands barefoot on the floor, carefully smoothing a shoulder that hasn't yet become human. And suddenly, you understand this is the other half of the gymnasium's secret. What was practiced outside in muscle and motion becomes eternal here in marble. Everywhere you look, statues are rising from blocks of Parian stone, discus throwers frozen in perfect twist, wrestlers locked forever in struggle gods disguised as men. Their forms gleam like captured sunlight. The sculptor gestures for you to step closer. The trick, he says, is not to carve a man, but an idea. He taps the chest of a half-finished Apollo. The stone must breathe virtue. You study the statue's face, calm, detached, almost impossible. It's beautiful, but also inhuman, the way perfection always is. We don't make these for desire, the sculptor adds, half smiling, though some might look too long. You can hear the wink in his voice. The Greeks never quite admitted that their art and their admiration were sometimes the same thing. The statues of the gymnasium weren't just decoration. They were lessons. Boys trained under the unblinking gaze of heroes whose every muscle represented moral strength. The ancients believed beauty led the soul upward closer to the divine. Maybe that's why they carved every vein and tendon so carefully, because to sculpt a body was to sculpt an argument. Outside, you remember seeing athletes pause to admire those figures before beginning their exercises. They'd mimic the poses, measuring their own flesh against marble ideals. Imagine growing up with gods as your gym mirrors. No pressure. You brush the dust from a nearby bust of Hermes. His expression is mischievous, almost alive. He was our patron. The sculptor says, the god of athletes, travelers, and tricksters. That last one makes sense. The gymnasium, after all, was full of masks, the mask of discipline, hiding desire of piety, hiding ambition of art, hiding emotion. The sculptor wipes his hands and points toward the shelves lined with smaller pieces. Fragments of thighs, torsos, lips. These, he says, are practice. The real work is in the eyes. He leans close to a statue carving a faint line that changes everything. A look halfway between serenity and longing. You see, he whispers, a god must look like he's seen everything and forgiven it. You think about how these statues would have once gleamed with color, not the pale white we imagine today. Reds, blues, golds, vivid, almost lifelike. Over time, the paint faded, leaving behind that ghostly marble purity we now call classical. History, it seems, is very good at polishing away the inconvenient parts. The sculptor chuckles when you mention that thought. Yes, he says the Romans will copy all this one day. They'll love the beauty, but forget the meaning. He chips away another flake of stone. That's the fate of art, it survives by being misunderstood. Outside, the afternoon light has turned honey-colored. You walk back through the courtyard past statues of heroes mid-stride, each one a silent echo of the living men training below them. It's easy to see how admiration slips into worship, how the boundary between athlete and god becomes dangerously thin. You overhear a philosopher lecturing nearby. The body, he says, is the vessel of virtue. The students nod, but one raises a hand. And what if the vessel distracts us from the wine? The question earns a nervous laugh. Maybe that's the eternal dilemma of the Greeks, how to celebrate beauty without drowning in it. As the shadows lengthen, the sculptures outside catch the last rays of light, their surfaces glowing as if lit from within. You find yourself staring too long at one of them, a bronze youth head tilted slightly downward, eyes soft but unreadable. There's something painfully alive about him, as if he's just about to move. For a moment, you could swear he's watching you. It's then you realize that the gymnasium, for all its lessons, is also a gallery of longing. One where art, flesh, and philosophy are trapped in a slow dance that never ends. They say the gods watch everything. But in ancient Greece, it often felt like the gymnasium was where they came to listen. The courtyard buzzes with stories today. A wrestling match has ended early, a discus throw has broken a record, and somewhere under the shade of an olive tree, a group of boys whisper a myth too daring to tell their teachers. You wander closer, and one word catches your ear: Ganymede. Every Greek boy knows that story. The handsome mortal youth snatched from earth by Zeus himself, carried to Olympus to serve as cup-bearer. And though few say it out loud, there's something more. In this world, that tale isn't scandal. It's scripture. To the Greeks, divine affection legitimized human affection. If the king of the gods could love a boy, surely admiration among mortals was no crime. You sit and listen as one of the boys retells it dramatically, waving his arms like a poet. And Zeus, disguised as an eagle, descended from the clouds. His audience gasps, laughing nervously. The myth has been told 1,000 times, but in this setting, half-naked, sweat-dusted, surrounded by statues, it feels intimate, almost prophetic. That's when it strikes you. Mythology wasn't background noise here. It was oxygen. These gymnasiums didn't just build citizens, they reenacted Olympus. Every act of training, of admiration, of love, mirrored some divine drama. You remember the story of Apollo and Hyacinthus, where the god of light accidentally killed his mortal lover with a discus, then transformed him into a flower so his beauty would never fade. The moral wasn't tragedy, it was transcendence. Love, like art, survived by changing shape. The philosophers used those stories as teaching tools. Plato saw in them symbols of the soul's longing for the eternal. Others, more cynical, saw excuses for indulgence. But for the athletes, the connection felt simpler. The gods loved beauty, and by perfecting their bodies, they honored the divine. Imagine worshiping through push-ups. A trainer passes by, overhearing the conversation, and chuckles. Careful with those myths, boys. The gods have jealous ears. Everyone laughs, but there's a current of respect beneath it. To offend the gods in this place feels like mocking your own reflection. You glance toward a mural on the wall, a faded painting of Hermes, leading young men in a race. It's chipped and weathered, but the colors still pulse faintly under the light. Someone once prayed before that image, hoping to run faster, fight harder, maybe be noticed by a god. The line between devotion and desire, it seems, was always negotiable. The talk turns to heroes Achilles and Patroclus, the pair whose bond Homer described in words that have fueled debates for millennia. Were they brothers in arms or something more? You hear one boy argue that true friendship can be as fierce as love. Another counters that courage born of affection is the strongest kind. You smile, ancient philosophy disguised as locker room banter. And it isn't only boys who remember these stories. Artists paint them, sculptors immortalize them, playwrights tease them on stage. In Aristophanes' Clouds, a father complains that his son has been ruined by the gymnasium, spending more time admiring his reflection than studying. Everyone laughs, but beneath the comedy lies the same question echoing here today. Where does education end and temptation begin? A soft breeze passes, carrying the scent of crushed mint and sweat. The voices fade, replaced by the rhythmic scrape of sandals against marble. For a moment you imagine Zeus himself standing above, knows that mortals still imitate his passions in miniature. Perhaps the gymnasium was always meant to be Olympus in disguise, a world where mortals rehearsed divinity, one disciplined movement at a time. The trainer calls for silence and announces a race. The boys line up, muscles taut, eyes bright. You find yourself cheering as they burst forward, sand flying under their feet. For all the talk of philosophy and virtue, there's something purely human in that moment. A rush of life, a flash of joy, a God story retold in heartbeat and breath. When the winner crosses the line, his friends lift him onto their shoulders. Laughter echoes off the columns. And for just a moment, you can almost see the gods watching from above, smiling, maybe even jealous. But even the brightest marble eventually cracks. You notice it first not in the statues, but in the people. The laughter in the courtyard grows thinner. The debates sharper, the admiration more guarded. Athens, your radiant, noisy, confident Athens, is beginning to doubt itself. The philosophers are partly to blame. When ideas become weapons, no one leaves unbruised. You overhear a group arguing near the baths, their voices echoing against the walls. The city's gone soft, one says. Boys spend more time oiling themselves than learning to fight. Another fires back. And what's wrong with a mind that values beauty? You can tell these are not just idle squabbles. They're the tremors of a cultural shift. Socrates' name surfaces more often now, usually with both admiration and suspicion. His students adore him, his critics loathe him, and everyone agrees he asks too many questions. You remember him from the gymnasium, barefoot, unkempt, entirely uninterested in appearances. He's proof, one philosopher says, that wisdom doesn't need muscles. Another snorts. Or maybe he's proof that our youth no longer care for the body. The debate feels endless. Then Plato writes his Republic, and suddenly the city can't stop dissecting the role of love, virtue, and education. He imagines an ideal state where affection between men could strengthen loyalty, but only if it served reason, not pleasure. Others interpret his words differently. Some use them to justify restraint, others to condemn the gymnasiums entirely. What was once a space of harmony now becomes a symbol of excess. The city's leaders begin to worry about reputation. Athens has already lost wars, lost allies, and now fears losing its moral compass. The gymnasium, once the pride of civic virtue, starts to look suspiciously like indulgence. Conservative voices call for reform, for discipline, for an end to soft living. Sound familiar? Every generation finds new ways to panic about the youth. Even the artists start to change. The sculptures grow less sensual, the poses more restrained. Muscles remain, but emotion fades. You can see it in the marble, the difference between a body that feels and a body that merely behaves. The gods themselves seem quieter. One evening you overhear a conversation between two teachers. "We've taught them beauty," says one, "but forgot to teach them balance." The other shakes his head. "No, we've just grown afraid of what beauty reminds us of." It's not just philosophy driving the change. Politics seeps into everything. After the Peloponnesian War, Athens isn't the confident city it once was. Poverty spreads, suspicion thickens, and people start looking for someone or something to blame. And so the gymnasiums become battlegrounds of morality, caught between nostalgia and reform. The most striking change, though, is silence. The easy laughter, the careless teasing that once filled the air, it all starts to fade. Students train with more focus, less conversation. Admiration still flickers, but it hides behind philosophy now, speaking in coded language. Love once discussed like geometry becomes something whispered again. You walk past the colonnade one morning and find a new inscription carved into the wall. So for sign self-control. It feels less like a virtue now, and more like a warning. Still, there are those who refuse to let the warmth die. You spot an older philosopher gently correcting a student's posture, his tone patient, his smile genuine. A reminder that kindness outlasts even law. You think of the countless teachers and students who found something real in this place, friendship, loyalty, love, and how easily history forgets them when the pendulum swings toward purity. The gymnasium doesn't crumble overnight. It changes tone the way a melody shifts key but keeps its rhythm. The games continue the debates too, but the spark of playfulness that once defined Athens begins to dim. You can almost feel it, the world tightening, preparing for something colder. And yet, walking home through the fading sunlight, you realize that doubt itself is a kind of inheritance. The Greeks questioned everything, even the things they cherished most. Maybe that's what made their civilization endure, its willingness to look in the mirror and ask, have we gone too far or not far enough? The cicadas start their evening song. You pause outside the gymnasium gate, watching the last few students oil their arms in the golden light, laughing softly as they pack up for the night. For a brief moment, the old Athens flickers back to life, the one that believed beauty and truth could live side by side. Then the light fades, and the marble cools. You return to the gymnasium one morning and find it quieter than you've ever heard it. The columns are the same. The marble still gleams, but the air feels heavier, like a play after the applause has ended. A new voice now echoes across Greece Latin. The Romans have arrived. They admire Greek philosophy, Greek art, even Greek teachers, but when it comes to Greek freedoms, they look away with polite disapproval. The gymnasiums still stand for now, but their purpose begins to shift. No longer the soul of civic life, they become museums of an older world, tolerated, not celebrated. You watch as Roman officers stroll through the courtyard, eyes cool armor gleaming their presence like marble turned to iron. They value discipline, yes, but of a different kind, one that prizes order over inquiry, obedience over exploration. The easy laughter and philosophical teasing that once filled this space now feel almost dangerous. The Romans take what they like, the architecture, the sculptures, the vocabulary of virtue. They rename the gymnasium as thermobaths and turn it into something grander, more public, but less personal. In these new halls, marble no longer whispers about philosophy. It boasts about empire. The naked body remains, but the meaning changes. What once symbolized ideal harmony now signals luxury leisure power. You walk past a trainer now, older, watching as his former pupils serve Roman patrons. They've kept the statues, he mutters, but killed the souls. He isn't bitter, just tired. The world has shifted around him too many times. The Romans tolerate Greek love in the theory, but not in practice. Their poets write about it. Catullus sighs, Virgil hints juvenile mocks, but socially it becomes suspect, especially for citizens. Masculinity hardens into something stoic and armored. The Roman man must be master, never beloved. What was once a philosophical ladder toward virtue is now a scandalous rumor to be buried under rhetoric. You wander through the changing city. The old gymnasiums still stand beside new temples and forums, but fewer young men come to train now. The philosophers who once lectured under the colonnades have been replaced by lawyers rehearsing speeches for the Senate. Even the statues seem to look away, their blank eyes dulled by centuries of reinterpretation. In one corner, you find an artist still carving a Greek working for a Roman patron. He's sculpting a familiar pose, the discobolus, but the difference is striking. The muscles are sharper, the expression sterner. Its beauty repackaged for empire, less play, more propaganda. You can almost hear him sigh as he polishes the surface. They want gods, he says quietly, but without their stories. Later, as you sit by the empty wrestling pit, a Roman tutor passes lecturing two young boys. His tone is precise, dry. The Greeks mistook indulgence for virtue, he says. We must not repeat their weakness. The words sting not because they're cruel, but because they sound so final, as if the centuries of laughter, learning, and love have been swept away in one sentence. Still the echoes remain. A young man glances at his companion a little too long. An older mentor praises his pupil with a warmth that feels older than Rome itself. The gymnasium may be dying, but the humanity it cultivated refuses to vanish. At dusk, you walk to the edge of the courtyard. A Roman mosaic decorates the floor now, geometric, orderly, efficient. It lacks the chaos of Greek life, the sense that ideas might leap off the stone and start an argument. You kneel and brush the dust away from a faint Greek inscription beneath it. Kalos kagathos, the beautiful and the good. A phrase the Romans copied but never quite understood. The trainer you met months ago appears beside you, his beard now silver. "They think they've improved us," he says softly. "But what they've done is make us quiet." He looks toward the last few students leaving with scrolls under their arms. Still, beauty always finds another way to speak. It just changes its language. And as you walk home through the evening streets, past Roman baths where senators recline, instead of wrestlers sweating for virtue, you begin to think he's right. Civilizations shift, empires fall. But the hunger to be seen, to be admired, to be understood, that survives every conquest. Centuries pass. The marble cracks, the columns crumble, the sand where wrestlers once sparred turns to dust. When you return at last, the gymnasium is no longer a place of laughter or learning. It's a ruin. Olive trees grow between fallen stones. The wind moves through broken arches, like a memory trying to find its voice. You walk carefully, brushing dirt from a fragment of carved thigh, from a bit of inscription worn thin by time. The words barely read now are et excellence, philia, affection. The same ideals that once defined a civilization are fading into the earth. Yet somehow you can still feel the warmth of the place. The echo of breath of bodies striving not for survival, but for meaning. They say ruins are quiet, but if you listen closely enough, they talk back. And what they whisper here is not shame, not scandal, but curiosity. Every broken pillar is a question. The present still hasn't answered. How did a world so open to beauty become a world afraid of it? The Christians who came later called these gymnasiums dens of sin. The Byzantines stripped their marble to build churches. The Middle Ages inherited the statues, but not the stories, seeing only idols, where the Greeks once saw ideals. Even centuries later, when scholars rediscovered the ruins, they admired the art, but erased the context. To them, marble purity meant moral purity. The color, the laughter, the tenderness, all were painted over by history's need for modesty. You kneel beside a cracked torso of Apollo, his face eroded by rain. Once he was the god of light, of balance, of beauty that bordered on danger. Now he's just a ghost with no nose and half a smile. You trace the line of his neck and think of the sculptor who made him, the athlete who inspired him, the lover who admired both. 3 lives, 1 ideal, all vanished. A bird lands on the statue's shoulder and tilts its head. Life goes on. You wander deeper into the ruins. Here was the courtyard, now a tangle of weeds. There the bathhouse, its basins cracked but still faintly blue with mineral stains. And there, almost invisible, a faint groove in the marble where generations of sandals once walked oiled and eager, chasing something larger than themselves. If you close your eyes, you can still hear it, the laughter, the scrape of sandals, the thud of bodies colliding in friendly rivalry. You can still feel the heat of admiration that once shimmered between tutor and student, between philosopher and pupil. It's not lust or scandal, it's recognition. A spark that says, I see you. I want to understand you. You wonder what would happen if someone built a gymnasium like this today, a place where education wasn't about competition, but conversation. Where strength meant discipline and beauty meant honesty. Would people come? Would they understand what the Greeks were really doing here? Not worshiping bodies, but using them as mirrors for the soul. The world has changed, but not as much as we like to think. The same arguments echo through time: what's proper, what's natural, what's moral. The same unease when affection doesn't fit the script. Maybe the Greeks weren't ahead of their time. Maybe they were simply honest about being human. You pick up a small shard of pottery and turn it over in your hand. On one side, the faint outline of two figures remains, one teaching, the other listening. The glaze is cracked, but their faces are serene. You can't tell whether it's a lesson, a friendship, or something deeper. Maybe it was all three. The sun begins to set, painting the ruins in gold. Shadows stretch long across the stones, and for a moment it feels like the gymnasium is alive again. The marble warming under the light, the gods leaning close to listen. You step back toward the city, the echo of your footsteps following like a heartbeat. Behind you, the gymnasium fades into twilight, but its spirit remains part philosophy, part affection, part rebellion against time itself. History will try to file it neatly under education or art or scandal. But standing here, you know better. It was never just about bodies or beauty. It was about the endless search for connection in marble, in sweat, in words, in glances. And as the night settles over the ruins, you realize that's the truest thing the Greeks ever taught civilizations may crumble, but desire, quiet, curious human outlives the stone. The marble gyms fade behind you, replaced by the salt-stung air of Piraeus. Now you're no longer among philosophers, you're among sailors. The Athenian navy waits at dawn, hundreds of oars poised above dark water. You can smell tar, hear gulls, and feel hunger twist with fear. Rowing rations and sea battles welcome to democracy at war. The sea has a way of claiming people before they realize it's happening. You feel it the moment the wind slaps your face, and someone yells your name from the dock, not as a friend, but as a conscription officer. Congratulations, you've just been drafted by democracy. The Athenian navy doesn't care whether you can swim or not. All it sees is a body with arms strong enough to pull an oar. And in a city with more ships than horses, that means you belong to the sea now. Athens around the 5th century BC is buzzing like a beehive on wine. The city's walls stretch to the harbor of Piraeus, where hundreds of sleek wooden ships called triremes rock gently in their berths. They're fast, deadly, and always hungry for money, for manpower, and for glory. You'd think they'd have volunteers lining up, but no. The pay's low, the rations are worse, and the average sailor's life expectancy is somewhere between maybe and don't count on it. So when your name is drawn in the assembly, you pack what little you have. A thin cloak, a loaf of barley bread, and the faint hope you'll come back alive. You trudge down to the docks, and the smell hits you first. Tar, sweat, fish, and democracy. The trierarch, the ship's captain, usually some wealthy citizen funding the whole operation, stands tall near the gangplank, inspecting his new crew like livestock. You recognize some faces, the baker's apprentice, a potter's son, maybe even a runaway slave trying to pass as free. No one speaks much. Everyone's thinking the same thing. How far will this ship take us, and will we ever see Athens again? The foreman, called the Calustas, barks orders. Below decks move, you shuffle down a narrow ladder into the trireme's belly, where sunlight turns to dust motes and the air grows thick. 3 levels of benches stretch the length of the hull, thranites on top, zygites in the middle, thalamites at the bottom. Guess where you end up? The lowest bench, where the floor constantly leaks and your knees press against the next man's back. Luxury at its finest. It's hot, it's cramped, and it's loud. You test the oarlock beside your seat, a hole cut into the hull with a bit of leather to keep out seawater. When the ship moves, it'll creak and groan like an old door. Each oar is about 4 meters long and heavy enough to bruise your pride if you're not careful. You look down the aisle, 170 men packed shoulder to shoulder, all waiting for the same signal. The rhythm of the drums will be your heartbeat from now on. Athens didn't build these ships for comfort. They were built for speed. Each trireme is a floating spear designed to ram enemy hulls at nearly 10 knots. Imagine a wooden missile powered by human sweat. It's a technological marvel of its time, and every Athenian citizen knows it's what keeps their empire alive. The sea is their wall, their defense, their open road to grain and tribute. Without ships like this, Athens starves. Without you, the oarsman, the ship doesn't move at all. You might wonder why anyone puts up with it. The answer is pride and pay, meager as it is. The Navy gives the poor a chance to earn silver and honor. The city celebrates naval victories like festivals. When Themistocles outmaneuvered the Persians at Salamis, Athens didn't just survive, it crowned itself queen of the Aegean. And who rode those ships? Men like you, anonymous in history, blistered in body, but vital to the story. Someone above deck shouts, "Cast off!" The ropes fall and you feel the first lurch as the oars dip into the water. The caluste starts the beat, boom, 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 and you pull in rhythm. The hull moans, spray flies up through the cracks, and you begin to understand why sailors talk about the sea like it's alive. It pushes back. It breathes. It's moody. And you're part of its pulse now. The coastline drifts away behind you, white marble temples shrinking to specks against the blue. You row through history without realizing it, past Salamis, where Athens fought for its life, past Aegina, where old enemies once watched from the shore. The oars cut the water like razors. Sweat drips into your eyes. Someone coughs, someone curses. The Kalostes doesn't care. The rhythm must never break. You think of home for a moment, the agora, the smell of roasted barley, your mother's worn hands washing clothes by the river. Then another command snaps you back, faster. You dig the oar, deeper muscles trembling. For the first time, you grasp the strange equality of the trireme. Up on land, citizens argue about class and wealth. Down here, everyone rows. The rich man's money might have built the ship, but your arms make it sail. Somewhere above deck, the lookout shouts that the wind's changing. The trierarch adjusts the sail, though it's mostly for balance. The oars are what really drive this beast. You steal a glance through the oar hole. The sea stretches endless and glittering, the color of polished bronze. And you realize something no politician in Athens will ever admit. The sea is the true ruler of this city. The assembly may shout, philosophers may argue, but in the end, it's the men down here sweating, pulling and praying that keep the empire afloat. The belly of the trireme is no place for poetry. It's a box of wood sweat and breathing bodies, all held together by rhythm and hope. You've been rowing for hours, maybe days. Time doesn't work the same down here. There's no sunrise or sunset, only the slow pulse of the drum echoing through your ribs. Every stroke is a deal you make with your muscles, one more pull, and maybe, just maybe, we won't die today. You learn quickly that the trireme itself feels alive. Every plank creaks like a sigh. Every joint complains as if it's tired of holding you all together. When the ship cuts through the water, it hums a low, resonant sound that feels like the heartbeat of something ancient. You can feel it in your knees, your elbows, even your teeth. There's a strange comfort in that vibration, like knowing the beast you're trapped inside at least wants to live as badly as you do. The benches are so tight that when you shift, the man in front of you shifts too, like a row of dominoes made of human misery. Your world is narrow, the oar in your hands, the back of someone's head, and the occasional drip of seawater sneaking through the seams. It smells of pitch oil and human effort. Every breath feels like drinking warm brine. Somewhere above deck, the Kalostes keeps the rhythm, his voice rising and falling with the drum beat. Pull 2, 3 pull 2, 3. His tone carries both threat and encouragement. the sound of someone who's yelled so long that even the gulls ignore him. The man's probably lost his voice more times than you've had birthdays. You're seated in the lowest tier, the thalamites, where the air grows thick and the light turns into a trickle of gold from the narrow oar ports. It's the worst spot for heat and the best for humility. Above you sit the zygites, then the thranites on top, those lucky ones who get a breeze now and then. But don't be fooled. Up there the sun bakes you like bread. Down here you just stew in your own sweat. Pick your poison. The trireme moves fast, astonishingly fast. When the rowers hit perfect rhythm, the hull seems to lift slightly out of the water, skimming over waves. It's the closest thing the ancient world had to flight. The captain says it's a miracle of design. You think it's a miracle of survival. After an hour of rowing, your hands blister. After 2, your arms go numb. After 3, your brain stops caring. The only thing that matters is not breaking rhythm. Occasionally, the trierarch will shout down encouragements, though they're usually less comforting and more threatening, Or I'll have your pay cut. He's the rich man funding the ship, and like any good investor, he wants results. You might hate him a little, but you also know he's risking his fortune just as you're risking your life. Without him, there's no ship. Without you, there's no motion. In that sense, you're business partners in misery. You start to recognize the personalities around you. The guy on your left hums old hymns between breaths. The one on your right swears he once saw Poseidon himself near Naxos, though his story changes every time he tells it. Someone a few benches away cracks a joke about how the Spartans don't need ships because their egos can float. The laughter dies quickly, swallowed by the sea's endless rhythm. Humor is precious cargo here. It keeps you from remembering how fragile the hull really is. Once during a short pause, you hear the trierarch and Kybernetes, the helmsman, arguing about the course. You can't catch every word, but the tone says enough. The Aegean isn't kind to those who lose their way. Rocks, currents, sudden squalls. It's like rowing across a field of invisible knives. You rowers have no map, no compass. You trust the man steering, the man drumming, and the gods who may or may not be listening. Sometimes the drumbeat slows. That's when you feel it most, the silence. The oars rise and drip, and for a moment all you hear is the sea breathing. It's almost beautiful. Then someone sneezes, the drum resumes, and beauty gets drowned in noise again. When you're granted a short break, you crawl up to the deck for air. The sunlight blinds you. The wind feels like a revelation. You see the horizon stretching out like an endless promise and realize you've rowed farther than you thought. The land behind you is just a gray blur now. In front of you, open water. It's terrifying and freeing at the same time, like standing at the edge of a new world you didn't ask to discover. If you squint, you can see the curve of another trireme in the distance, its oars flashing in perfect rhythm. The Athenians are proud of that sight, dozens of ships moving as one, a wooden army riding the waves. Somewhere out there is an enemy fleet, maybe Persian, maybe Peloponnesian. You can almost feel them waiting, sharpening their rams, whispering their own prayers. You push the thought away. For now it's just you, your oar, and the endless sea that judges everyone equally. By the third day, you start to understand the unwritten laws of life aboard a trireme. Athens may boast about democracy on land, but down here hierarchy is carved into every plank of the ship. You see it, smell it, and occasionally want to punch it. There are ranks even among the rowers, and they matter more than you'd think in a place where everyone looks equally miserable. The Thranites, those seated on the top benches, like to remind everyone they're the elite of the oar world. They get the breeze, the better light, and a slightly higher pay. Not much, but enough to feel smug about. The zygites in the middle row are the glue steady, quiet, reliable. And then there's you, the thalamite buried at the bottom like a root system holding up a wooden forest. You all row the same rhythm, but it's the top men who get the applause when things go right. Sound familiar? Still, you can't survive out here without hierarchy. Every man knows his role, and if one falters, the whole rhythm collapses. The Kalliustes keeps the tempo, the Kybernetes steers, the Triarch commands, and everyone else rows like their lives depend on it, because they do. The Athenian navy doesn't run on fancy slogans or patriotic speeches. It runs on coordination calluses and caffeine's ancient cousin, sheer terror. Sometimes you catch yourself watching the top rowers, their shoulders glistening with sweat, their oars cutting perfectly timed arcs. You can tell who's done this before and who's new by the way their hands move. Veterans have calloused palms that could grate cheese. Rookies, they're the ones quietly bleeding and pretending not to cry. No one mocks them. Everyone's been there. There's a strange fraternity in shared suffering, an unspoken rule that what happens in the hull stays in the hull. Of course, competition still creeps in. One day the man beside you starts rowing harder, trying to match the beat before the drum hits. You can feel the hull lurch slightly off balance. The Kalliustes stops mid-chant, his eyes like daggers. You race the sea, not each other, he growls. Lesson learned. The next stroke hurts twice as much, partly from shame, partly from the new blisters. When the ship stops for the night, the hierarchy rearranges itself again. The Triarch gets a tent on shore. The helmsmen and officers dine near the prow, sharing salted fish and watered wine. The rowers, well, you eat where you sit. Barley cake if you're lucky, dried figs if you're not. But someone always manages to smuggle a bit of garlic or olives. You chew slowly, pretending the sea breeze makes it taste better. You listen to conversations drifting down from the upper deck. They talk about battles past the glory of Salamis, the legends of Themistocles, the daring raids of Cimon. You imagine what it would be like to fight in one of those grand moments of history. The truth is, most rowers never see the enemy's face. They fight through rhythm and exhaustion, not through swords or heroics. When Athens wins, the generals get statues. When it loses, the rowers get forgotten. Still, there's pride here, even in the dark. The trireme isn't just a weapon. It's a symbol. Athens built its empire on naval power, and every stroke of your oar is a heartbeat of that empire. You remind yourself of that when your arms ache so badly you can't sleep. Without me, you whisper to no one, this ship goes nowhere. It's a small comfort, but it's yours. Now and then a joke cuts through the monotony. Someone compares the Thranites to spoiled roosters. Another mimics the Kalliustes' hoarse voice, and laughter ripples through the hull. It doesn't last long. Nothing does at sea, but it lightens the air. Humor like salt preserves sanity. One afternoon, the Triarch announces that the ship will join a small flotilla bound for patrol near the island of Samos. The older sailors nod knowingly. Samos has been both ally and enemy, more times than anyone can count. You hear whispers about tribute rebellion and the need to remind them who rules these waters. You rowers just hope it's a short trip, not another drawn-out siege. As you prepare for departure, you notice something new: respect. The officers, once distant, now look at the rowers differently. Maybe it's because they've seen you survive the endless rowing sessions. Or maybe they finally grasp that this fragile machine only works because 100 men refuse to quit. Either way, it feels good, if only for a moment. That night, as you lie on the deck staring at the stars, you think about how strange this democracy of the sea is. Back in Athens, citizens debate in the assembly, raising hands to decide wars. Out here, decisions happen through rhythm, collective, instinctive, and wordless. When everyone rows together, the ship flies. When one man hesitates, it stumbles. Maybe this is what democracy feels like when it actually works. Sweaty, exhausting, and full of splinters. The first thing you learn about rations is that hunger has no democracy either. The second thing you learn is that the sea has a way of making every smell stronger, especially the bad ones. And yet here's your hook for the day. A loaf of barley bread and a handful of salted fish once powered the most advanced navy on Earth. Imagine running an empire on that. Morning begins before sunrise. You wake to the sound of waves slapping the hull and someone coughing up the previous night's salt water. The smell of tar and sweat never leaves. But now another note joins the symphony: stale grain. A crewman crouches over a clay pot, stirring a thick mush of barley and water. This is your breakfast, if you can call it that. It's gray, lumpy, and vaguely sour. Still, after 12 hours of rowing, it tastes like a gift from the gods. The Cetologos, the ship's quartermaster, is in charge of food distribution. He's part accountant, part miracle worker, and part devil. Rations are calculated with the precision of a siege plan. Every man gets a set amount of barley oil and dried fish per day. Some ships even bring onions or olives when supplies allow, though they're usually reserved for officers. You'd trade your share of pay for one bite of roasted meat. But on campaign, fresh food spoils faster than morale. To keep spirits up, someone usually waters the wine literally. Greek sailors never drink it straight. They mix it with seawater or fresh water when they can find it. A cup of that and a few figs can turn a miserable meal into something resembling dinner. You try not to think about how many hands touch those figs before yours. Hygiene isn't exactly the Navy's strong suit. Sometimes when the weather's good, the crew hauls the ship onto a beach for the night. That's when things almost feel human again. Fires flicker, laughter returns, and the cooks work small miracles with limited supplies. You hear a familiar joke. An Athenian sailor can row for 10 hours, but can't boil barley without burning it. No one argues. The food is awful, but it's warm. And on the sea, warmth is worth more than taste. It's not just the body that gets hungry, the soul does too. Men start talking about home. The baker dreams of honey cakes. The fisherman swears he can smell grilled squid drifting on the wind. Someone else claims to have once tasted Spartan rations black broth made from pig's blood and vinegar and insists it wasn't that bad. Everyone laughs because everyone knows Spartans would rather starve than eat something enjoyable. Occasionally, the gods get their share of dinner. Before setting sail again, the captain offers a small libation wine poured into the waves for Poseidon. You find yourself mumbling a prayer, half out of faith, half out of fear. The sea has taken better men than you. A little superstition feels like insurance. Hunger makes you notice things you normally wouldn't. The smell of the officer's stew drifting down from the stern feels like a cruel joke. You can tell exactly how far you are from Athens by how stale the bread tastes. And when the sea turns rough, even the bravest rower clutches his stomach like it's mutinying. Food becomes time itself, each bite a measure of how long you've been away. Every few days, the trireme stops to resupply. It's rarely glamorous. You row up to a rocky shore, a few men jump out with jars and baskets, and they haggle with local merchants who know desperation when they see it. Salted anchovies, barley sacks, amphorae of oil, all hauled aboard with the same urgency as weapons. Food is strategy. Athens doesn't win wars just by fighting. It wins them by eating longer than its enemies. You hear stories of naval blockades where men go weeks on half rations. They chew on leather straps or seaweed when the grain runs out. During the Peloponnesian War, some crews starved in sight of land they couldn't reach. You try not to imagine it. But the image stays: rowers with hollow eyes, their oars moving slower, the sea around them, calm and cruel. One night, as the crew eats in silence, an older sailor beside you taps your shoulder. His name's Phocion, claims he fought at Mycale years ago. He grins through cracked lips and says, "You know, lad, barley makes a better soldier than gold. Gold feeds the rich, barley feeds the empire." You nod, though you're not sure if it's wisdom or delirium talking. Still, he has a point. The great battles of the Aegean weren't decided by heroes or gods. They were powered by stomachs like yours. Later, you lie back on the deck, chewing the last of your ration. The stars glitter like flakes of salt on a black sea. You think about how strange it is that empires rise and fall over such simple things. Grain salt fish. Athens may be remembered for its philosophers, but right now its fate rests in the hands of a man wondering if he'll get an extra olive tomorrow. Nights at sea are when the world feels both infinite and claustrophobic. You sit there on the deck, wrapped in your thin cloak, staring at the horizon that never moves. The air smells of salt and pitch. And the stars above look close enough to touch if you weren't too tired to lift your hand. The waves slap the hull in a slow rhythm, softer than the day's drumbeat, but just as hypnotic. The Aegean becomes your lullaby, though it's a lullaby that never lets you sleep for long. When the sun dips below the waterline, the Triarch orders lamps lit along the deck. Olive oil flames sputter inside small bronze cups, throwing trembling gold across the oars. The light dances over men's faces, half shadow, half ghost. You can see the fatigue etched into everyone. The swollen fingers, the salt, stiff hair, the distant look in the eyes of those who have rowed too long. The sea has a way of sanding people down until they're just bone salt and habit. You're on night watch now. That means sitting still, eyes straining over dark water, listening for anything that doesn't sound like waves. The Athenian navy may rule the sea by day, but at night pirates and rival scouts roam like sharks. Somewhere out there, a Persian trireme could be lurking, or worse, a storm waiting to unfold. You find yourself whispering small prayers, some to Poseidon, some to anyone who might be awake and listening. Silence at sea is deceptive. There's the quiet hum of the wind through the rigging, the sigh of the waves brushing the hull, the occasional creak of wood, and yet every tiny sound feels like it carries meaning. You start hearing things that may not exist: the slap of a fishtail, the groan of distant thunder, the whisper of oars that aren't yours. Your imagination becomes another crewman, one who never sleeps. The veterans don't talk much on night duty. They've seen too many things: ships vanishing without a splash, men falling overboard with no cry, ghostly lights dancing on the water before storms. St. Elmo's fire, one of them mutters, pointing to a faint blue glow flickering along the mast. The gods' lanterns, another adds. You pretend to believe them. It's easier than thinking about static electricity. Sometimes when the sea is calm, you can hear the sound of dolphins following the ship. Their breathing rises and falls like sighs in the dark. For a moment it feels almost peaceful, almost holy. The same gods who rule over tempests also made these creatures sleek and laughing at your struggle. You wonder if Poseidon laughs too. The officer on deck paces quietly, counting constellations to pass the time. You remember hearing once that Athenian sailors used the stars as their compass long before compasses existed. Tonight the Great Bear hangs low in the north, and Orion leans over the horizon like a sentry. The sea looks still, but you know it's never really still, just waiting. Every so often, a gust of wind carries the scent of land pine resin, wet earth, or cooking smoke from a distant shore. It makes you ache in a way hunger never could. You picture Athens, the glow of torches along the long walls, laughter spilling from taverns, the chatter of merchants selling figs and fish. Then you remember that the same city that smells of olives and perfume sent you out here to rot in brine. Democracy has a funny sense of fairness. A creak jolts you back. The Kybernetes whispers to the helmsman to adjust course. The stars shift slightly in your view. The oars are lifted and locked. For a few minutes, the ship glides silently under sail like a phantom slipping through the dark. It's beautiful in a way you'll never admit out loud. You think about how many centuries will pass before anyone else sails this same water and sees this same glow on the waves. Probably none of them will know your name, but they'll feel what you feel now, that strange pull between awe and fear. When your shift ends, you crawl back to your place below deck. The air is warmer, thicker, but familiar. Someone nearby snores softly. Another murmurs in his sleep, calling out to his mother or a god. You lie there, eyes open, letting the motion of the ship rock you. Sleep never really comes. It just sneaks up like a thief. Before you drift off, you realize how different the sea feels at night. During the day, it's an enemy to conquer. At night, it's a god to appease. Every sailor learns this truth. Eventually, the sea doesn't hate you. It just doesn't care whether you live or not. And that somehow is even more terrifying. If you think rowing is hard, wait until training day. The Triarch calls it discipline, but you start to suspect it's his way of reminding everyone who's in charge. The sun isn't even up yet, and already the Callistus' shouting voice cracking like a whip. Positions oars ready, keep time, or kiss the sea. You groan, stretch aching arms, and grab your oar. The sound of 170 men shifting into place echoes like thunder inside the wooden hull. Training is part punishment, part necessity. The Athenian Navy runs on rhythm, not muscle. Any fool can row fast. It takes real sailors to row together. The drum starts steady, low, relentless. Pull, boom, pull, boom. The first few strokes feel familiar, but the pace builds fast and soon your lungs are burning. The Callistus keeps time with almost cruel precision. Miss a beat, and the oar behind you slams into your back. You learn faster than any classroom could teach. They call this kybernesis, the art of coordination. To outsiders, it might look simple, but you know better. Every move has to align perfectly, arms, legs, breath, even heartbeat. When it works, the trireme becomes something otherworldly. A machine of men and wood slicing through waves like a blade. The first time you feel it click, it's intoxicating. The hull lifts slightly, speed doubling spray, flying past your face like silver dust. You almost forget the pain. Almost. The Kybernetes, the helmsman stands at the stern, eyes fixed on the horizon. His job is to read the sea, the subtle rise of a swell, the whisper of wind, the shift in current. You wonder how he does it without instruments. But then again, you've learned that instinct is the best compass out here. One wrong decision, and the trireme could flip faster than you can say, Poseidon's bad mood. Between drills, you catch your breath and sip a bit of watered wine. Around you, men are slumped against the hull, panting. A few joke weakly about how this must be what the gods feel like immortal, except for the smell. The camaraderie feels different today. It's less about laughter and more about endurance. Every man here has earned a kind of grim respect. Then comes the ramming practice. The Triarch orders 2 triremes to face off, each crew rowing at full speed toward a floating target, a stripped-down hull filled with sandbags. Faster, he roars. The drum pounds like a war god's heart. You grip your oar muscles screaming. The prow surges forward, the bronze ram at the bow, gleaming in the sun. When impact comes, it's like being punched by the sea itself. The hull shudders, your teeth rattle, and a geyser of spray explodes over the deck. The crew cheers anyway, because that sound, the crunch of wood splitting, is the music of victory. You see now why the trireme is feared. It's not just speed, it's precision. In real battle, one well-placed ram can shatter an enemy ship, sending dozens of men into the sea. But miss the angle, and your own bow splinters instead. Every training run is a gamble between glory and shipwreck. After the drills, the crew practices turning maneuvers, the dekplaus and periplus. Fancy names for what basically means hit them before they hit you. The dekplaus is a daring tactic, charging between enemy ships, breaking their line, then circling back for the kill. The periplus is even riskier, swinging around their flank to strike from behind. You can feel the adrenaline even in practice. These moves turn the trireme from a floating barracks into a predator. While the officers argue about formations, you overhear talk of famous admirals, Simon, Themistocles, Phormio men who turned naval battles into legends. Someone says Phormio once won a fight outnumbered 2-1 by simply knowing how the wind would shift at dawn. Another sailor jokes, if he were here now, he'd tell us to stop whining and row harder. You can't help but grin. Ancient heroes or not, every Athenian sailor shares the same aches, the same curses, the same stubborn pride. By midday, your arms feel like lead. The Keloustes calls for one last drill emergency response. Enemy ramming from starboard, he shouts. The crew snaps into motion oars, lifts ship rolls, the helmsman turns sharply. You feel the deck tilt under your feet, water sloshing, men shouting. Then calm. The trierarch nods in approval. You live another day, he says dryly. The joke lands like truth. When training ends, the sea is calm and the sun paints the water bronze. You sit on the deck, rubbing your hands raw with oil to ease the blisters. The younger rowers compare bruises like trophies. The older ones stare quietly at the horizon, lost in memories of real battles. Somewhere beneath the exhaustion, you feel something new, confidence. The ship no longer feels like a cage, it feels like a living weapon, and you're part of its heartbeat. As dusk falls, a breeze carries the faint smell of pine and smoke from a distant island. You wonder if you'll ever see it up close, or if you'll only ever know the world through the spaces between the waves. Either way, you know now what keeps a trireme alive. Not glory, not gold, but rhythm, the kind that binds men together tighter than any oath ever could. You wake to shouting. Not the usual kind, the Keloustes yelling about tempo or someone cursing at blisters, but a sharper sound that cuts through the morning haze. A lookout on the bow points toward the horizon, and then you see it, two faint shapes gliding over the blue sails, swelling like ghost wings. For a heartbeat, the sea looks calm, almost beautiful. Then the trierarch says the words that turn your stomach to ice. Enemy ships. You've trained for weeks, maybe months. But the first sight of an enemy fleet makes your hands forget everything they know. The ships are distant, but growing larger with each swell. Dark hulls, rows of oars flashing like teeth. It's impossible to tell yet if they're Spartans, Corinthians, or Persians. But it doesn't matter. The sea feels suddenly smaller, the air tighter. The Kybernetes calls for formation, his voice steady but faster now. Form line abreast, ready the oars. No one speaks. Even the wind holds its breath. You slide back into your seat, fingers trembling slightly as they find the familiar worn grip of the oar. Around you, the others do the same. Faces harden. All jokes, all stories from the night before vanish like foam. The Kallustes begins the slow drumbeat again, and the ship comes alive. 170 men moving as one organism of fear and muscle. The trierarch walks along the deck, eyes scanning the horizon. He's not yelling, not yet. Calm is part of the act. Athenian commanders know panic spreads faster than fire. You can feel him trying to smother it before it catches. He stops near the bow and says quietly, "They outnumber us 2-1, but they don't outrow us." Then he smiles a small grim thing, and the drumbeat quickens. The enemy ships approach in tight formation, their bronze rams glinting under the morning sun. They're smaller than you expected, but fast, slicing through the water like sharks. You can hear faint echoes across the sea, their own drums, their own chants. It's strange how both fleets sound almost identical. It reminds you that war, for all its speeches and flags, is mostly just two groups of tired men doing the same thing, hoping they'll be the ones who get to go home. The helmsman calls out bearings. Wind north-northwest. Keep her steady. The rowers tighten their rhythm. The ship cuts the waves, your muscles sinking to the pulse of the drums. You taste salt sweat and the faint tang of bronze from the ram at the bow. The world narrows until it's just oar-water breath. Repeat. A shout from the lookout, they're breaking formation. The enemy line splits like a mouth opening wide. One group turns to flank, the other charges straight ahead. They'll try the periplus. The trierarch snaps. You've practiced this maneuver in drills, but practice doesn't prepare you for the real thing. The speed, the noise, the raw panic of it. Hard starboard, the Kybernetes jerks the tiller. The trireme banks sharply, the oars on your side, lifting clear while those opposite dig deep. The ship spins like a dancer, pivoting mid-stride. You feel the momentum wrench your shoulders, the hull tilting so hard you think it might tip. But it doesn't. The Athenian design holds. The enemy comes into view close now. You can see faces, bare chests, glints of helmets. Their commander stands tall near the prow, shouting something you can't hear over the thunder of oars. It doesn't matter. The message is clear, they mean to ram. Ready your Kallustes bellows. Hold, hold. Every muscle in your body locks. The enemy ship bears down water, churning white around its prow. For a second, the whole sea feels like it's waiting to exhale. Then row you dig in. The oar bites hard, the drum pounds, and the ship leaps forward. The ram misses by inches, scraping along your hull with a shriek that makes your teeth ache. Splinters rain down. You don't even have time to breathe before the helmsman turns again. Now the trierarch cries. Bring her around. The enemy's flank flashes past. Your prow surges, the bronze ram aimed low. The impact comes like a hammer through your chest. A booming, shuddering crunch, followed by the eerie hiss of water pouring into another man's death trap. You can't see much, but you hear everything. Shouts panic, the awful groan of wood breaking. Then it's gone. The sea closes over them. You row backward on command, pulling free from the wreck. The ship rocks with the sudden emptiness where the enemy once was. A few men cheer, others just stare, breathing hard. Victory always feels quieter than you expect. The trierarch wastes no time. Next target, he shouts, scanning the melee. All around, ships dart and collide, oars snapping rams, slamming sails, burning. The sea is chaos, but somehow within it, the Athenian line holds. You feel proud, terrified, and oddly calm all at once. The drumbeat slows. You glance across the water and catch sight of another trireme flying Athens' blue and white pennant. The men aboard wave their oars in salute. You raise your slightly above you. Gulls circle their cries, mingling with the fading sounds of battle. You wonder what they think of human strange creatures building floating coffins and calling it strategy. But that thought vanishes as quickly as it comes. The sea still glitters under the same sun, indifferent as ever. There's no warning before the next impact. One moment you're rowing steady, feeling almost triumphant, and the next, crash. The hull jerks sideways with a violent shudder that sends men sprawling from their benches. The enemy has struck back. Wood splinters' oars snap like bones, and a wave of freezing water sloshes across the deck. You grab the nearest rope just in time as the ship lists, creaking like it's groaning in pain. The battle is no longer elegant. It's chaos. The drumbeat returns faster now, almost frantic. Back rowers pull front brace, the Calouste yells, his voice rasping. The oarsmen obey on instinct. You pull with every muscle you have, left your arms trembling from exhaustion and fear. The sea sprays through the oar holes, stinging your eyes with salt. All around, men shout orders, curses, prayers. You can't tell which is which anymore. You catch a glimpse of the enemy's ship, a black-painted hull with a snarling boar carved into its prow. Its ram is embedded deep in your starboard side. The triarch doesn't hesitate. "Cut them loose," he roars. A crewman runs forward with an axe, hacking at the tangled wood where the ships are locked. The helmsman spins the tiller to turn the trireme away, the oars scraping desperately. Every heartbeat feels like a countdown. Finally, the last plank gives way, and you break free. The enemy ship drifts back wounded, but still afloat. You're both bleeding into the same sea. You've heard people romanticize sea battles, heroes shouting victory speeches, rams gleaming in sunlight. The truth smells like sweat, blood, and burning pitch. Ships crash like beasts in a wooden brawl. Men fall overboard clutching at nothing, and the water turns from blue to something darker. You try not to look too long at the bodies drifting past. A man beside you, Callias, from the upper tier, has a gash on his shoulder. He doesn't stop rowing. He just wraps a strip of cloth around it and keeps the rhythm. You stare at him, then at your own trembling hands, and realize that courage isn't loud. It's quiet, methodical, stubborn. It's doing the next stroke even when your body wants to quit. Another command rings out, "Brace for Diekplaus." The word jolts you awake. It's the risky maneuver you trained for the piercing run through the enemy line. The Kybernetes adjusts course. The crew leans with the turn, and suddenly you're charging straight between two hostile ships. The oars on either side whip dangerously close water, exploding in white foam. For an instant, you're certain both hulls will crush you flat. Then, miraculously, you're through. "Hardport, turn and strike," the captain shouts. The helmsman swings the trireme around like a dancer spinning mid-step. The ram catches the enemy's flank, this time perfect angle, perfect speed. The impact throws you forward. The sound is horrifying and satisfying at once, wood-splitting men shouting, the hiss of air escaping a sinking hull. The other ship folds inward like a dying animal. You pull the oar free, breathing hard. Around you, the sea has turned into a mosaic of wrecks. Floating debris, broken oars, shields, amphorae bobs among the waves. Athenian sailors shout to each other across the chaos, rallying to reform formation. Somewhere smoke rises from a burning trireme. The heat mingles with the salt air, acrid and strange. For a moment, there's stillness again. You rest your head against the oar chest, heaving, and glance at the triarch. His face is streaked with sweat and soot, but he's still standing. "Hold fast," he calls. Athens still breathes. You don't realize you're smiling until you feel the salt crack your lips. Maybe it's madness. Maybe it's relief. But something inside you shifts. The fear doesn't vanish. It just finds a place to sit quietly beside pride. You're part of something vast now, something brutal and magnificent. The sun climbs higher, glinting on wet bronze and drifting corpses. The battle isn't over, but the enemy is breaking. You can see them turning, their formations unraveling. The Athenians push forward, ships fanning out like hawks, closing in on prey. You row slower now, careful, ready to strike again if needed. The Kelustes lowers the tempo, his voice hoarse but steady. 2, 3, pull. You spot a trireme flying, a Spartan insignia limping away to the west, smoke trailing from its stern. Another enemy crew abandoned ship, their oars floating like sticks in the tide. Victory creeps in slowly, the way dawn seeps over the horizon. No trumpets, no cheers, just a long, exhausted exhale shared by 100 men who've survived the impossible. Then comes the strange silence that follows battle. The only sounds left are the creaking of the hull and the hiss of water against the sides. You can hear your heartbeat again, slower now, heavier. You look down at your hands, blistered, swollen, trembling, and realize they've done something history will remember, even if it forgets your name. The Triarch orders the flag raised. The blue and white cloth unfurls in the wind, a small miracle of color against the gray sea. You can almost hear Athens itself in that motion, the shouting agora, the marbled temples, the city that sent you here to fight its wars and carry its pride. A sailor nearby spits into the water and mutters, "Poseidon took his share today." You nod. The god of the sea always does. When the drum finally falls silent, you don't cheer. No one does. The battle is over, but the quiet that follows feels heavier than the fight itself. You sit there, oar slack in your hands, listening to the sea breathe again. The water has turned calm, too calm, as if ashamed of what it's seen. Pieces of broken ships drift by like memories that refuse to sink. You can smell the pitch, the splintered pine, the iron tang of something you'd rather not name. The Triarch gives no speech, no heroic declaration. He simply looks around, eyes searching for survivors. "Launch the skiff," he says, voice hoarse. "Pick up who we can." And just like that, the men of Athens, sweaty, salt-crusted, exhausted, become rescuers instead of warriors. You and a few others climb into a smaller boat, oars creaking as you push off from the trireme. The sea is a graveyard now. Bits of oars, helmets, and the odd sandal bob among the waves. You spot a man clinging to a floating plank, a Corinthian by his armor. His lips are blue, his hands shaking. The helmsman hesitates, waiting for the Triarch's signal. A long pause, then finally pull him in. The man collapses in the bottom of the skiff, coughing seawater. He looks at you like he doesn't understand why he's alive. Maybe you don't either. War at sea doesn't leave room for logic. Mercy and vengeance blur together like waves colliding. When you return to the main ship, others have hauled aboard more survivors, some friends, some enemies. A few are too far gone to save. They lie quietly along the deck, their faces waxy in the sunlight. You notice how small they look now, how all the noise of battle shrinks to this silence and the slow roll of the sea. The quartermaster begins handing out fresh water, 1 cup per man. You drink yours in one gulp, barely tasting it. The salt has left your tongue raw. Nearby, Callias, the same rower who fought through that shoulder wound, sits against the railing, his face gray. He catches your eye, smirks faintly, and says, "Still better than farming." You almost laugh, though your throat won't quite let you. The trierarch orders inventory. The tally is grim. Several oars destroyed, one section of hull cracked, 4 men dead, 7 missing. It's not the worst outcome, but it feels like it. The sea always takes something. You start patching what you can, hammering new pegs into the soaked wood. The rhythmic tapping sounds strange after hours of drum beats. It feels almost indecent to make noise now. When the immediate work is done, the officers gather amidships. They speak quietly, faces shadowed by exhaustion. You overhear fragments talk of repairs, of regrouping with the rest of the fleet, of sending word back to Athens. Someone mentions the spoils of victory, the captured cargo, maybe even the bronze ram torn from a sunken enemy. But it's clear no one's in the mood to celebrate. That night, the sea is eerily still. The ship drifts near the remnants of the battle torchlight, reflecting off the water in scattered points of gold. Some men sit silently with their heads bowed. Others stare at the horizon as if trying to see home. A few mutter prayers for the dead. The Calustes hums softly. An old rowing chant turned into a kind of lullaby. It's the closest thing to peace anyone has felt in weeks. You lean over the railing, watching small fish dart through the debris. The moonlight turns everything silver. The oars, the waves, even your blistered hands. You think about the Persians, the Spartans, the countless men who have fought over this same sea. You realize how absurd it is that people build ships just to destroy them. But maybe that's human nature, to test the limits of courage and folly at once. Phocion, the old sailor, sits beside you again. His voice is low, cracked like driftwood. "You did well today," he says. "Not everyone does their first time." You want to ask him how many first times he's had, but his eyes tell you not to. Instead, he adds, "The sea forgets nothing, but it forgives if you keep rowing." Then he leans back and closes his eyes, as if that explains everything. Before dawn, you're roused to duty again. The deck still smells of smoke and salt, but the horizon glows faintly pink. The trierarch decides to circle the site one last time, searching for stragglers. You row gently, the oars dipping in slow, tired arcs. Somewhere off the port side, you spot a piece of wood floating upright. It's the shattered prow of an enemy ship, its carved boar's head split neatly in two. For reasons you can't name, you feel sorry for it. When the signal comes to head home, no one cheers. There's just a long, collective sigh, a sound half relief, half disbelief. The sea that was your battlefield now becomes your road again. The same waves that tried to kill you are carrying you back. Funny how that works. You row through the wreckage, through the ghosts of what just happened, and watch the sunlight return to the water. The sea looks the same as it did before the battle, indifferent, almost innocent. You realize that in the grand story of the world, this fight will be just another ripple. But to you, it's everything. The sea looks calm again, but it's lying. The aftermath of battle always does that, pretends the worst is over while quietly counting its dead. You sit slumped over your oar, too tired to move, watching sunlight glitter on the water as if nothing ever happened. The sound of waves lapping against the hull feels almost gentle now, like the ocean is apologizing for earlier. But every man on board knows better. The Aegean has no mercy, no memory, and no reason to explain itself. The trierarch finally gives the order you've all been waiting for. Rest oars. The drum falls silent. For the first time in hours, you hear your own breathing. The crew exhales as one, some groaning, some laughing weakly, others just staring blankly at the horizon. Victory is a strange thing. It doesn't taste sweet. It tastes like salt sweat and disbelief. Then comes the hardest part, cleaning up the mess. The deck is slick with seawater and blood, mostly fish blood, you tell yourself, even when you know it isn't. Broken oars are tossed aside, ropes retied, and the wounded carried to the shade of the sail. One man lies motionless, eyes open toward the sky. Someone quietly closes them. There's no ceremony, no trumpet, just a nod and a shared silence. The sea doesn't give time for mourning. It demands order first. The Kybernetes checks the hull for damage. The trireme groans with every wave, but she's holding. You patch leaks with tar and linen, like bandaging a wounded comrade. The ship isn't just wood anymore. It's a living thing that fought beside you. Every scar on her hull tells the story of what you survived. You run your hand along one of the splintered planks and whisper a quiet thanks, not to the gods, but to the ship herself. When the bodies start to drift closer, the sailors grab hooks and poles to pull them in. Some wear enemy crests, some don't. The sea erases loyalties faster than politics ever could. You help haul one aboard, a young man with no armor, no sandals, probably a rower like you. His face is strangely peaceful, and for a moment you feel something heavy twist in your chest. You realize you've just seen yourself, or what could have been you. The line between survivor and corpse is thinner than a strand of seaweed. Phokion, the old veteran, leans beside you. His eyes are sunken but sharp. "Don't look too long," he mutters. "The sea's got enough ghosts without you feeding it more." He's right, but it's hard to look away. War teaches you how to kill. It also teaches you how to forget. The trick is doing both at once. When the sun climbs high, you spot small shapes bobbing in the water. Amphore shields, bits of sailcloth, spoils. The order goes out to retrieve what you can. Men dive in, splashing between planks, laughing now that the danger's past. It's absurd, almost childish, this sudden joy after horror. But that's what survival does. It swings you wildly between grief and gratitude. The crew hauls up whatever's useful, intact oars, enemy gear, even a few jars of wine. You pass one around, drinking in the small gulps that burn your throat and calm your mind. Someone raises a toast to the gods, someone else to the ship, and one joker to the barley rations, since they clearly kept us alive. The laughter that follows is the first real laughter in days. A few enemy sailors are spotted clinging to debris. The trierarch pauses before speaking. "Pick them up," he says at last. Even a Spartan drowns the same as an Athenian. No one argues. The rescued men climb aboard, coughing, shivering eyes, darting between faces that could have been their executioners minutes ago. No one harms them. The sea already did enough of that. By evening, the surviving ships gather to take stock. Signal fires flicker across the horizon, each one a small heartbeat of the fleet still alive. You count maybe half of what you started with. The rest gone beneath the waves, or adrift somewhere beyond reach. Yet when the trierarch stands at the prow and raises his hand, the crew cheers anyway. Not because the loss doesn't hurt, but because they're still breathing. That's enough for now. The sun sets blood red over the Aegean, and the sky turns violet and gold. You sit with your back against the hull, listening to the gentle creak of wood and the low murmur of men talking softly. Someone starts humming a slow, mournful tune that sounds like something between a prayer and a lullaby. Others join in their voices, rough but steady. You hum too, because silence feels too big tonight. As darkness falls, the stars return. They're the same ones that guided you out here, the same ones that looked down when the battle began. But they seem closer now, almost watchful. You wonder if they've seen every war since the beginning of time. Probably. And you wonder how many sailors before you whispered promises into the sea and hoped to make it home. Probably too many to count. You close your eyes and breathe in the salt air. The fear hasn't gone, it just feels quieter now, replaced by a strange peace. The worst has passed, and yet deep down you know this won't be your last battle. The Athenian navy always finds another enemy, another island, another story for men like you to vanish into. For now, though, the ship drifts gently under a sky full of forgiving stars, and the sea, merciless, magnificent, rocks you back towards something that feels almost like rest. The next morning begins without fanfare. The horizon blushes faintly pink. The gulls return, and the sea, as always, pretends nothing happened. You rise slowly, every muscle protesting, feeling more barnacle than man. Around you, the crew stirs, faces hollow, but alive eyes sunken, but shining with the quiet disbelief of people who've somehow survived. The trireme creaks like an old companion waking up, and for a moment, all is still. Athens may have won the war, but the real victory is surviving long enough to row home. The trierarch gives the order to set course for Piraeus. The helmsman adjusts the tiller. The calyst resumes the drumbeat, and once again the ship slides forward, gliding across the wine-dark sea. The rhythm feels slower now, more human. There's no urgency, no panic, just the steady pulse of oars meeting water. You fall back into the movement, your body obeying before your mind even wakes. After so much chaos, rowing feels almost peaceful. The coastlines you pass seem unreal. Quiet coves, distant villages, a fisherman's torch flickering like a star against the cliffs. The smell of pine and salt fills the air. The war for the first time feels far away, and yet you know it isn't. Somewhere out there, another fleet is already being built, another commander dreaming of glory. Empires don't rest, they just reload. Still, the men begin to talk again. Someone starts a story about home, a wife, a vineyard, a promise made before departure. Others join in each tale, half boast, half prayer. You listen quietly, picturing the agora, the shouts of vendors, the marble shimmer of the Acropolis under sunlight. You realize that for all its noise and corruption, you miss Athens more than you expected. The sea may have hardened you, but it hasn't cured your longing for solid ground. Phocion sits beside you, the old veteran who once said barley built the empire. He chews on a fig and chuckles softly. You'll see, lad, he says, when you step ashore, the city won't look the same. You'll walk slower, talk softer. People will think you're listening to ghosts. Maybe you are. You don't answer, but you understand exactly what he means. Once the sea claims a piece of you, it never gives it back. The fleet rows into calmer waters as the day stretches on. Some men nap between strokes, others stare blankly at the sky. You watch dolphins leap alongside the hull, their movements effortless. They seem to mock your exhaustion, but in a kind way, like they're reminding you that life still exists beyond war, beyond commands and bruises. The sea isn't always cruel. Sometimes it just wants you to notice its beauty. By the time the first outline of Athens appears on the horizon, no one cheers. The city rises slowly, shimmering in the haze, its temples gleaming like carved sunlight. The long walls stretch out to greet the returning fleet, and smoke curls lazily from the hearths. You row harder now, not because the calyst tells you to, but because your heart does. Every stroke brings you closer to the smell of olives and dust, to familiar streets and waiting faces. As you near the harbor, trumpets sound not for you personally, but for all of you, the nameless men who made the empire's heartbeat. Citizens crowd the docks, shouting, waving, pointing at the returning triremes. Children run along the water's edge, pretending to row invisible oars. You can almost taste the bread and wine waiting ashore. And yet behind every cheer you feel a strange distance. They see victory, you see ghosts. The trireme glides into its berth. The ropes are thrown, the oars lifted for the last time. You climb out slowly, legs stiff, shoulders heavy. The ground feels unsteady beneath your feet after so long afloat. Someone claps you on the back. Someone else kisses the earth. You just stand there, breathing in the smell of land dust, smoke, and life. The trierarch walks past, giving each man a nod. For all his wealth and pride, he looks as worn out as the rest of you. "Well rowed," he says simply. No speeches, no promises of reward, just acknowledgement. And somehow that's enough. As the crowd begins to disperse, you linger by the ship, running a hand along its scarred hull one last time. This wooden beast carried you through storms and slaughter, hunger and fear. You whisper a quiet farewell, not wanting anyone to hear. Sailors are sentimental like that, though they'd never admit it. That night you walk through Athens under the glow of oil lamps. The streets feel smaller now, the chatter of philosophers and merchants oddly fragile after the roar of the sea. You pass a group of men arguing about the cost of olive oil, and you almost laugh. They have no idea what silence sounds like in the middle of the Aegean, or what it feels like to pull an oar while lightning splits the horizon. You pity them a little, but you also envy them. You reach the Piraeus waterfront again before dawn. The triremes rest in their sheds, quiet as sleeping giants. You sit on the edge of the pier, feet dangling over the dark water, and for a long time you just listen. The waves lap gently against the stones, whispering the same rhythm you rode to for months. It's strange you thought you'd hate this sound forever, but now it feels like home. Athens is safe tonight. The fleet stands ready, the empire endures, and you, an anonymous sailor, are part of it all. You came back different, stronger, quieter, a little more salt than flesh. And though you'll never see your name carved in marble, you'll always know that for a brief moment you were part of the heartbeat that kept the city alive. The sea will call again one day, and when it does, you'll answer not out of duty, not for pay, but because the ocean still runs in your blood. You rode into history once. You could do it again. The sea quiets at last, and your trireme glides home through water turned to glass. The drums are silent now. Only the whisper of oars remains. You've rode through hunger, fear, and fire, and somehow Athens still breathes because of you. The salt on your skin feels permanent, like proof you belonged to the sea once. As the harbor lights flicker ahead, your body sways with the same rhythm that once drove war. Close your eyes, sailor. Let the tide carry you home. The world is calm again. The sea hums softly beneath you, and you finally drift into sleep.